All right, we are live. I'm back again with Manny Grossman. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Eric. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm actually a little freaked out about this tale
You
that
should be.
I'm just barely learning about it, and I want to open up right away and tell everybody this is dark. I don't know how else to put it. Dark, disturbing, very bad stuff. I actually am not monetizing the stream. If you want to send super chats, great. I will get that. I appreciate that. I don't know if I'll be able to address them completely or not, or how it's going to do on questions and answers. But I just want everybody to know right out the gate, I'm going to say this story is dark. This is not family friendly. I don't want anybody to be surprised. I will be playing an interview segment with somebody who's he's an unrepentant predator, and he makes no bones about it, talking about it in the interview. He doesn't say very specific. Well, no, it is kind of graphic too. The interview is horrible. Everything about this is horrible, and I know I'm like going to run everybody off, and I don't want to run everybody off, but I, out of absolute respect for everybody, I want you to know. I want you to know this is dark, and Manny's breaking something important here, though. It's an important tale. It's not America's Untold Stories, but it could be. Um, it's definitely an untold story until now. So, well, this is not on the other channel. This is on my main channel. Here we go. So we have quite literally a case involving a serial killer who is behind bars, a Nobel Peace Prize winning, non-apologetic sex predator, child molester. I don't know how to put it. He flat out, and you will hear him say it. So I'm not just throwing accusation. He is a scientist who won the Nobel Prize for science, and he's a predator. Fortunately, he's dead, and I'm happy to say that. No offense, but I don't have need for him. So, Manny,
Yes,
tell
sir.
us about this pile you're dumping.
Oh, well, we got quite a story for you guys today. And of course, this is unfortunate. Well, I don't know whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, but this is this topics that I wallow in when doing my series on the Son of Sam crimes. And of course, thanks for having me back, Eric. I think I was on about a month or two ago talking about talking about the investigation into Son of Sam that we've been doing. And of course, this story is sort of a tangential piece of that. It's connected to Son of Sam. And what are we talking about today? Well, we are talking about the case, the famous case of the disappearance of Etan Patz. Now, I'm 48 years old. Eric, you're probably Gen X as well. I don't want to ask you your age, but we're probably
51.
around
I'll
51. So, all right. So we're the same. We're around the same years. Now, if you were in New York City in 1979, you remember this case for sure. And in fact, most people in the country do remember this case. And the reason why is because it was a major case of kidnapping, abduction of a young child, a 6-year-old named Etan Patz, right off the streets of Soho in Manhattan, the south of Houston Street.
That was the stranger danger one, right? I mean, it
Correct.
fed into that. Okay.
Yes, and much like Son of Sam was used to fuel panic and hysteria in New York City and to a lesser extent the rest of the country, the Etan Patz case was used in a very, very similar way to stoke the fears of every parent that your kid was going to be kidnapped. Now, I still have a lot of research to do in Etan Patz, so we're not done with that. But a story has emerged in Etan Patz which runs counter to the official narrative. And this is a story that's kind of been going around on the internet for a couple of years now, but not until I sort of collated it all the interviews that had been done, all the personalities involved, and I got them all sort of on the page on my video series, is this starting to come together. And we recently came into possession with some very, very serious Yonkers Police Department documents, which show how serious the authorities took this. So we'll get into that in a second. Let's first talk about Etan Patz. Well, Etan Patz, of course, 6 years old, abducted from the streets of Manhattan, and it became one of the first kid to be appeared on a milk carton. We all remember
Oh,
right.
okay.
We all remember the milk carton kids. It was like a big thing in the 1980s, and body was never found. And they did actually end up convicting, weirdly enough, 2 people for the murder. The first guy that they picked was a guy named Jose Ramos. Now, Jose Ramos, it was an interesting character, and he certainly was a predator, a child molester, a sexual pervert in that way. He also, interestingly enough, lived in the drain pipes in Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx. And to those who
This sounds like it.
It does sound like it. Now, this Van Cortlandt Park connection is interesting, and in my opinion, the story on Jose Ramos has not been fully fleshed out. He actually was friends with Etan Patz's babysitter. And then, of course, you have the whole Van Cortlandt Park connection, which, for those who've been watching my video series, Van Cortlandt Park, in addition to Untermeyer Park, was a huge site of occultic rituals, sacrifices, murder during the 1960s and 70s. So, of course, this Etan Patz case took place in 1979. So Jose Ramos, they never were able to really pin anything on him. Again, no body. They could never find any real forensic evidence, and so I think he spent some time in jail. I'm not quite sure. And then they ended up going after a guy named Pedro Hernandez, who strangely enough confessed to the killing. But one of the things that they didn't really publicize was that he was also kind of a mentally ill, schizophrenic guy. And if you know anything about that population, they can say they went to the moon and believe it, right?
So did Ramos get out, or
I'm not quite sure what happened to those 2. I have to do. I'm preliminarily just starting the research on Patz, and my main focus has been on this story that I'm going to bring you guys today, because very serious detectives and NYPD and Yonkers PD people took the story I'm about to tell you extremely seriously. And so what we're going to do is we're going to bring the audience up to speed with where we are on this alternative view of the Etan Patz killing, murder, abduction. And also, more importantly for the audience, I think, is to show you the genesis of how this all came to be in terms of my investigation of it. So before we continue with that, Eric, do you have any further questions before I, sort of...
No, what do you want to see next?
All right. Well, all of this kind of started with a little blurb out of a book. And Eric, if you wouldn't mind getting up on the screen for the audience, the image that just says simply Ace Brown.
Ace Brown. Got it.
Correct.
No,
and this is a textbook example of how one little sentence out of a book can lead to great discoveries. Okay. So this was an interesting story in and of itself, how I came to possess this book, The Way It Was, by Detective James Rothstein. Okay. Now, Detective Rothstein is a legendary New York Police Department detective that used to handle vice, Times Square, child trafficking, prostitution, the gay bars and such in New York City from 1965 to about 1980. As part of his investigation, he was actually brought up to Yonkers, and it says here, in 1969, information was received from Ace Brown, a reliable source, who informed Rothstein that human and animal sacrifices were being performed in Untermeyer Park in Yonkers. Okay, the famous Untermeyer Park of Son of Sam fame. So this, of course, got me all hot and bothered as a Son of Sam researcher. And the reason why is because I had never heard the name Ace Brown before. This is another one of these things that we're doing on my series, where we're sort of critiquing Maury Terry's work. We're asking serious questions as to why certain things were left out of the book, because we're going to learn that Ace Brown, this character by the name of Ace Brown, is actually extremely important to both the Son of Sam story and, as we'll see, the Etan Patz story. And he was nowhere to be found in the definitive book about it. All right, that notwithstanding. So I give Detective Rothstein a call. And we start talking about Ace Brown. Detective Rothstein tells me about how he was brought up to Untermeyer Park. So I said to Detective Rothstein, you got to get me some files. I need to show you I need some files here. So he gives me, he sends me a whole bunch of files in the mail pertaining to his investigation into the gay underground of New York City, the trafficking that took place in the 1970s, and more interestingly enough, papers from his investigation with Maury Terry that he did in 1996. And this is where we're going to start to get into the new investigation of this Nobel Prize winning doctor who goes by the name Dr. Carleton Gajdusek. So Ace Brown, for your audience, if you just want to put up Ace 1, Eric, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Ace Brown was and you could just scroll through the rest of the articles as I'm speaking. Ace 2, Ace 3, Ace 4, and Ace 5. So Ace Brown was a pimp. Okay.
So he's Walter Brown then.
Walter Brown. Walter Ace. I call him Walter Ace the Hinge Brown. And the reason why I call him the Hinge is because he's that hinge between Times Square trafficking of children and the bodies ending up in Untermeyer Park in Yonkers. Very interesting character, as we're going to see later on. He seems to have been very well protected. He was a pimp out of Yonkers who was also a another one of these child traffickers. He was heavily involved in pedo stuff and all this kind of stuff. And so here he is here, just proving the point. Yonkers man accused of illicit acts. And this is an article about how Walter Brown, who was Ace Brown, unlawful imprisonment, obscenity, endangering the welfare of a minor, and resisting arrests. Okay, so these were talking about youths, one of whom was from Sandy Hook, Connecticut, interestingly enough. What's interesting about Ace Brown is this weekend I'm going to interview a couple of guys who also lived in Ace Brown's basement as well in the 70s. So I'm finding all of these characters that are giving me all sorts of, insight into this guy. Anyway, he was an interesting character. Long story short, he was involved in pimping kids. All right, and this is about a murder that victim named Sammy White that Ace Brown lived with, and all this kind of stuff. Who was another one of these child, molesters and types. So Ace Brown, remember the name Ace Brown. Okay, now. So let's ease ourselves into learning about Gadjusek. Okay, now this Nobel Prize winner, and believe me, I'm going to tie this in all for you guys. It's going to make sense. All right. So the first time I ever heard the name Carleton Gadjusek was in Carl DeNaro's book, The Son of Sam and Me, Why I Was Not Shot by David Berkowitz. And of course, Eric, you interviewed Carl last week, and I want to say it was a really great interview. Thanks. And it was nice to see Carl and all that kind of stuff. So in his book, which I found very interesting, is an index in the back. So if you wouldn't mind, Eric, please go to Carl Gad, because I want the audience to read this.
Carl Gad.
Yeah, it's right after.
There we go.
There we go.
I'm just a little slow.
That's fine. Okay, now, all right. So this is a blurb out of Carl's book. It's this little index at the end where he brings us up to speed and tells us names of people involved in Son of Sam that Maury Terry didn't name or didn't know about when he was writing his book. And one of them was this guy here. And of course, I read this last April, and I said, who the hell is this guy Carleton Gadjusek? Never heard of him. Deceased, Nobel Prize winner, convicted pedophile, adopted.
This is like burying the lead.
Right.
It's a blurb at the end. Oh, by the way. Oh, yeah, there's this other dude.
Right, exactly. I find that a lot of times in indexes and in these little end appendixes is where all the gold is. So he adopted over 30 young boys from Micronesia. And for those of you who are interested, there's a BBC documentary on him called Something and the Boys. I forget. It's very easy to find. Carleton Gadjusek, and then just type in BBC. You'll see the documentary.
I'm going to interrupt for a quick second. I apologize.
Yeah, of course.
I'm not trying to throw you off track, but Micronesia triggers something in my brain. But there was a major study there that out of everywhere in the world, Micronesia had like this giant suicide cluster problem.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's related at all, but it just stands out of my mind because in general, first world countries are the big suicide problems.
Right.
US, Japan, etc. But Micronesia was a standout.
That's interesting. I wonder why. I
Just
mean, this
something that you might want to note, and I don't know if you want to look into it, but it was significant enough that it stood out in one of the books. I don't know if it's a Freakonomics or a
right.
Gladwell, but I just know
I'll
that.
definitely make a note to myself because that's kind of an interesting little thing.
Sorry, back to
Uh,
your story. Sorry to
all right,
interrupt.
cool. So Carleton Gadjusek, right? So he adopted over 30 young boys from Micronesia and brought them to the U.S. And this is true. This was a sick guy. I mean, he brought over probably over 50 people, 50 young boys, and molested them all. Okay, we'll talk about that. It was one of the boys who accused the good doctor of abusing him. He maintained a house in Maryland and one in Yonkers. His connection to the Son of Sam case is not very clear, but one thing is clear. He is another pedophile with ties to Yonkers. Yes, he was born in Yonkers, in generally the same areas where the whole Son of Sam thing took place, just on the other side of the highway, not too far away. This blurb is a little disingenuous, though, I must say, because when I got to know Carl, I found out that he knew a lot more than he was letting on in this book. In fact, he warned me off of this. He told me that if I were to look into this case, into the Etan Patz case, he said, I'm not looking into it, Manny. I'm smarter than that. I said, why? He goes, if you look into this case, you will get killed. Okay, great. Carl didn't know a certain essential element of my personality, which is if you tell me something like that, I'm even more interested. I'm going to, right? Like that.
Right.
I'm not
Well, and in
scared.
fairness, Carl is. Uh, I gotta push on that a little because Carl's been
Okay,
around a long time,
right.
and Maury also didn't mention him at all. So Carl mentioned him a little bit. Maury didn't mention him at all,
Right.
and somehow both of them who've been around and maybe know some other people, there may be some legitimate
They're
worry in there, and maybe he was trying to warn you to keep you safe. And I'm not saying right or wrong, but you never know.
No, absolutely. And I have thought of that, but the only conclusion I can come up with was that while there might have been some threat back in the 80s and 90s when all these people were young, vital, still alive, still powerful,
Mm-hmm.
in the year 2021, I've been doing a bunch of shows on this, and so far my door has not knocked, my car hasn't been tampered with. I
Right.
mean, knock
Yeah.
on wood, but so far or other, I'm okay. So I am not worried in the least, and in fact, I think that this is a story that I want to expose to, well, as I'm doing here, I want to
Mm.
expose this to the world. So I started finding out interesting things about this guy Gadjusek. I found out that he was a Boy Scout in Yonkers, and I was very interested in that in my Son of Sam research because I realized that so many of the people who ended up becoming involved in this whole SOS thing were Boy Scouts. They had been molested as children.
Sure, in
The,
church.
the same
Yeah.
church, right? The same sort of thing that this guy Carleton Gadjusek was involved with. But this is a lot deeper than that. So Gadjusek, you can Google him, you can put him on Wikipedia. The guy was basically an extremely respected, worldwide respected researcher. He did all the research and groundbreaking research into mad cow disease, prions. He worked with the NIH. In fact, we have a paper where both his name and Dr. Anthony Fauci's name are on the same paper. So we're trying to see if we can
Not Saint Fauci.
Saint Fauci, yes, both of the NIH. And so we're trying right now to establish a link between those two, because you never know. I mean, the way that these people operate is they compromise people and then they have blackmail material. I mean, was Fauci compromised? Was he? I mean, those are questions for another day, and I don't have the answer to them. But in either case, here's where it gets very interesting. So in the 90s, okay, all of a sudden, the Son of Sam investigation kicks into high gear and overdrive. People are starting to talk. Detective Rothstein is starting to work with Maury Terry. They're starting to get Yonkers PD to open up things and to investigate. NYPD is starting to get calls about certain cases and so on and so forth. So there's two detectives, one of whom name is Detective Mike Codella, and he was a very well-respected detective sergeant in the New York Police Department. Also worked with the DEA, very heavy-duty guy. He's been on my show several times. And in fact, he was the first person to come out and talk about this publicly, and we'll talk about his story in a second. And for those who are interested in his story, talking about this, I actually you can go to his website, because mine is on my Subscribe Star. So unless you subscribe, you won't be able to see it on my site. But he put up the same interview on his. It's called Up Against the Wall, Mike Codella on YouTube. Mike Codella, Up Against the Wall. And on that is our 50-minute walk and talk where we show you the Lower East Side. We show you the building where Jose Ramos lived, and he talks all about the Etan Patz case. But since that interview, we've gotten more information, and that's what we're going to show you guys today. Really explosive information, groundbreaking stuff, and things that are really going to make you wonder and think about this whole thing.
And send me the link later so I can put it in the show notes.
Sure, yeah, but it's just Up Against the Wall, Mike Codella, Codella. Good guy, and he's on the True Crime Files team, and he's a great resource for us whenever we need him. He's just a phone call away. It's been a great working relationship with him. But I recently came into some documents from the Yonkers Police Department, which actually, in a weird and great way, ties everything together. Ace Brown, Gadjusek, Son of Sam, Berkowitz, Etan Patz. So this is some heavy duty stuff, guys, and we're going to go through this, and I think you guys are going to be very interested in what we have found. So before we get to that though, let's just show real quick. I want to show you let's show Etan Patz's photograph, Patz 1, Patz 2. For those people who don't remember this case. Now, Etan Patz was, again, a 6-year-old boy taken off the streets of Soho in Manhattan. What I find interesting about this case is that if you look at these photographs, they're all very professional, which I find
almost like a modeling shot. That it is very, very well done. Right,
which is odd, but we have found out that his father was a professional photographer.
Oh, well.
So that would make sense. You know, my father was a photographer. He wasn't a professional, but he was just as good as this guy right here. And there's some pictures of me when I'm 2 or 3 that look just as professional as this. But I still find it weird, especially without the shirt. I mean, you know, there's a whole other avenue of research that maybe people can do into the Patz family and see if there's anything strange happening there. But I hope not either. But that notwithstanding, let's just show real quick R1, because this is the file, one of the many files given to me by Detective Rothstein, which starts to show these names that we're talking about as people of interest. Okay, so what do we see in this document right here?
Trying to get
you could keep it blown out for a second, because I just want to talk about this whole document. So this document, okay, was written by Maury Terry and was given to Detective James Rothstein in 1996. And you can see at the top left, 12/11/96, okay, the end of 1996, to Jimmy, okay, meaning James Rothstein. And James Rothstein is the person who gave me this file out of his personal folder. It has never been seen before in public ever. This is a historical document. These are names of people who Maury Terry was extremely interested in vis-a-vis Son of Sam. Okay, now there's some interesting names. You have Buddy Beam, son of Abe Beam, who was the mayor of New York City in 1977. David Heppenstall, who was an aide to Abe Beam, and all these, Roy Cohn, right? All these people.
Roy Cohn, who died of AIDS and was Trump's guy.
Exactly, and that's what made me always suspect a little bit of Trump, that he hung out with Roy Cohn. But check out the 4th name on the list, Dr. Gadjusek. Okay, whoa, Maury Terry was interested in Dr. Gadjusek in 1996. Now let's show a picture of Gadjusek real quick, and then we'll get back to this, because I want people to understand who we're talking about. Go to GAD 1 or any of the GAD 1s. Now look at this guy. Children, if you ever see someone that looks like this, run far away, all right? Because these guys always have this look, all right? Go to the next one, GAD 2. They always have this certain look, all right? Now, this is the Nobel Prize winning. These are the people who are revered by society, by polite people, right? These Nobel Prize winners. Well, we're going to learn what this Nobel Prize winner maybe was up to vis-a-vis Etan Patz. All right, thanks, Eric. Let's go back to R1, please.
Mm-hmm. Eventually. All right.
Now, what this document R1 really was a list of names for Detective Rothstein to actually interview Ace Brown about, okay? In 1996, both Detective Rothstein and Detective Mike Codella, independently of each other, interviewed Walter Ace Brown about the Etan Patz case and Son of Sam. Son of Sam was Rothstein, Etan was Codella. So you see Gadjusek's name on this list, okay, in addition to other names that are all Son of Sam related, not Etan Patz, okay? So I want to now go to the Murphy letter number 1, because now we're going to start tying this all in together for you guys.
Lots of redactions in this.
Exactly, but unfortunately, the nut meat is there. What we really need is there. So now I just want to show you this first page, everybody in the audience, because just to establish what we're talking about here, this first page actually doesn't have anything to do with Gadjusek. The second, third, and fourth page are all about him. But but this is all part of the same document. So I want to be totally thorough with you guys out there. So just so we see what this is a Yonkers Police Department Special Investigations Division, okay, document talking about an interview talking about Gadjusek and Etan Patz. Now, this was written by Detective Kevin Murphy. To those people who are Son of Sam heads, okay, people who've read The Ultimate Evil, who've watched Josh Zeman's Netflix documentary, Kevin Murphy's a famous guy. He was a Yonkers detective who worked very closely for many years with Maury Terry on the Son of Sam case. He worked with Detective James Rothstein. In fact, Kevin Murphy's still alive. We are trying very hard to get this guy to speak to us, but for some reason, he only emerged for Zeman's documentary and then went back underground, and we can't seem to find him. Even though, we know he's in Yonkers, we know that presumably he's interested in finding out answers to this case and helping it get solved.
Hey, but Carl, if you're watching, can you help us out?
Yeah, maybe they can. We're trying to get Detective Rothstein to call him. I mean, we're trying a lot behind the scenes, but Kevin Murphy seems to be a very elusive character. In either case, this first page has very little to do with what we're talking about. So, but I just wanted to establish 1996. You see the date up there, 1996. We see Yonkers Police Department. This is an official document from Yonkers Police Department. If you wouldn't mind, Eric, please go to page 2, because this is where it starts to get very interesting. All right, page 2. So I'm just going to read this for you guys, the pertinent sections, and try to explain it as I go. So on March 3rd, 1998, I spoke to the attorney for Dr. Daniel Carleton Gajdusek. The attorney's name was Mark Hulkauer, 1330 Connecticut Avenue. Now, this guy, Mark Hulkauer, we've done some research on him. He's an extreme deep state lawyer. This guy protects every deep state criminal that there is. Major lawyer down in Washington, D.C. All right. After conferring with Gajdusek, Mr. Hulkauer stated he would need a full immunity from prosecution prior to any interview. That's pretty, like when I don't need full immunity, right? I hadn't done anything, so I don't need full immunity. Like, anyway, he needed full immunity. So the rest is, the following information on Dr. Gajdusek is known by a biography. And what I'll do is I'll put this on my Twitter for you guys to download and read. I'm all about giving you guys as much information as possible. So this stuff here is just his bio, arrested on April 4th, 1996 by the Frederick County, Maryland Sheriff's Office for 2 counts of child abuse, 2 counts of perverted practice. I think, Eric, this is the time to show that video clip of this guy, just showing who we are dealing with here.
Yeah. Be ready, everybody.
And this is graphic.
I have never once taken a kid to my bed. They have come to my bed, and I am no one to kick them out. If they hug me and I find them playing with my cock, I say, good on you, I play with theirs. And I'll do it now and with great pleasure.
When you grow up with a culture that does not condone this, that totally
No
objects to
culture
it,
condones it.
surely it must hurt you when you get subjected to a grown-up forcing sexuality on you.
boy, what a brainwashed person you are. With 300 or 400 boys who had sex with me from 8 and 10 and 12, 100% have run into my bed, jumped in without my mentioning it, and asked for sex. I have never asked for it. I've never, and most of my friends, don't you realize that I was jumping in people's beds hoping they would take me? All boys want a lover. My God.
You as a kid.
And the idea that these men go after you don't have any point in the world. Now, come on. That's the rule of the game.
All right, Eric, I think we've seen enough of this guy.
This
So
is the reason, folks. This is not monetized. I don't even know how long this video is going to stay up. No, I'm not kidding. That's some of the most disturbing footage I've ever seen.
Right.
Even
And
goes
this is
into hundreds.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, this is the sociopathic person who is being revered by the Nobel Committee and given peace prizes for work in medicine. So you can clearly see there's a sociopathic mindset. There's a mindset, a psychopathic mindset. There's a mindset of he can do no wrong and that the whole world is against him and that whatever he does is okay just because he deems it okay. All right, keep that in mind when we read the rest of this passage. So he's currently serving an 18-month sentence in the Frederick County Jail. He is scheduled to be released in April and May. So he ended up getting busted. One of the kids that he molested went to the police in the 90s, and he got busted, and he ended up in jail in Maryland. Okay, now.
Or nowhere near long enough.
Nowhere near long enough, absolutely. Because back then, I don't think anybody had an inkling, even though he was giving interviews on the BBC, right? Talking about 300 kids.
And being indulged. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And even
I don't know what's more disturbing, him or the guy saying, well, doesn't that make you feel bad?
That's what I was just going to say, Eric. Wasn't that disturbing to hear the guy say, oh, all these adult concepts, right? Like it's just a weird adult concept that having sex with a child is bad. I mean, that's a crazy mindset that you just saw there in 1 minute. And I'm glad that you appreciated, the gravity of that. So Dr. Gadjusek, back to the letter, has a medical degree from Harvard Medical School. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1976 for discoveries involving degenerative brain disease, such as the mad cow disease. For the last several years, he has worked for the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, as the chief in the laboratory for central nervous system studies. He spent many years in Micronesia studying the people and their medical conditions. Here's where it starts to get serious. While in Micronesia, he wrote in his NIH journals of his sexual experiences with young males and the lack of inhibitions of the Micronesia people to accept consensual sex between children and adults. Gadjusek adopted and brought to the United States 37 boys and 1 girl. Mike Codella, by the way, told us it was actually a lot higher than that. One of the adopted boys pressed the aforementioned charges. Let's go to the next page, please. Let me just get there with you.
And by the way, I'm going to pause because, just reading takes out of it.
Yeah, of course.
We're talking about the NIH, and I can't immediately accuse things, but it is curious, if you will, that he worked in the same institution with the same person who funded both gain of function research and other research that involved unspeakable cruelty with the
beagles, right? Exactly.
And I mean, and this guy ran a lab, and that funding was done in a lab. I mean, and then there's other things that again, I can't relate them. I can't say that they're connected at all.
Right.
But that Bill Gates had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, of course.
Do you know why he had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein?
No, I think he just wanted money or he wanted I think he wanted a Nobel Prize, right? So Epstein was a kingmaker. He could get people Nobel Prizes.
And he might know, shall we say, people around the Nobel world who had peccadillos and could be potentially blackmailed. I don't know for sure. Again, allegedly, speculative.
We're going to get
odd.
And let me tell you something. There's a passage in here where it talks about a lot of these sick elites and what they do with kids. We're going to get to that in a second. But yeah, we're trying to right now to speak to Judy Mikovits, who worked with Fauci and all those guys and who knew all them. to find out the links between Fauci and Gadjusek. But I think that there's a rich vein of research to be done right here in this NIH and the personalities involved, because we're seeing, these are some sick psychopathic people, and they need to be torn down because they're destroying our world. All right, back to page 3. Regarding this investigation, and this is where it starts to get very interesting, and tying all this together. David Berkowitz, the infamous son of Sam, for those of guys who don't know, in 1996 spoke to a Yonkers Police Department confidential informant about a Yonkers cult member involved with the disappearance of children and possible homicides. Berkowitz said that the cult member had a house on Palmer Road, Yonkers, near the Sawmill River Parkway. Now, that's just where Gadjusek lived. He lived right off the Sawmill River Parkway on Palmer Road. I just did a recent video on my site where I showed you his house, and we talked about this on a walk and talk. Okay, the CI, confidential informant, related that Berkowitz was at the house several times for parties and meetings during 1976 and 77. Berkowitz indicated that he was a prominent doctor who was gay. At the time, I checked the Palmer Road for possible subjects, but discounted Gadjusek. But on April 4th, Gadjusek was arrested in Frederick, Maryland. In a subsequent meeting with David Berkowitz, he stated to me that Gadjusek was a member of the Yonkers Son of Sam cult. Although not at any of the homicides, meaning the Son of Sam homicides, he stated that Gadjusek would have known about the plans, but definitely about the children. Now, that's a weirdly written sentence. I'm not quite sure what that means exactly. In late of 1996, I went to the Frederick County, Maryland Sheriff's Office and spoke to Detective Redacted. He briefed me on the investigation, and I was able to view the NIH journals of Dr. Gadjusek. From a source that came forward after the arrest of Gadjusek, a Lim Chong Keat from Singapore.
Hold on. Why in the hell would that be redacted? He was convicted. The lead detective would be in court records as part of the conviction. So I don't know why would you block that out? It just said he was the primary detective. He would be named as the primary detective in the filing. That's a
good point, which, I don't know much about that kind of stuff, but if you look at this redactions, often you can zoom in and see underneath this. But on this one, you can't. They went through serious effort to really redact this. But check this out. This gets back to what you were talking about before, Eric. After the arrest of Gadjusek, a Lim Chong Keat from Singapore was identified as a friend of Gadjusek and as a pedophile. Keat told the source that he was associated with wealthy intellectuals that traded young children amongst themselves. And then Redacted was also a member. So this Lim Chong Keat, by the way, is an extremely famous architect. He's still alive. There's a picture of him in here. If you just go to Lim, L-I-M, you can see a picture of this guy. And again, children, there he is, Lim, right there. If you ever see a guy that looks like this coming at you, children, run the other way. Hold on one second, Eric. I really apologize. Let me just turn my ringer off. I'll be right back.
Oh, God.
Sorry about that. The pleasures of doing this out of your living room. It's great.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So Lim Chong Keat. So here's a guy who's a famous architect. This guy's massively well known. In fact, I'm very ashamed to say, as a botanist and as a horticulturist, he's a very famous botanist as well, with several plants named after him. Now, it's funny because I always used to tell my classes at New York Botanical Garden, of course, before I got fired from there for being a conservative, I said that the horticulture world was run by the eyes wide shut crowd. And people actually would complain to the management about that I would say that. But I knew something that they didn't, right? Here we go. All right. So now we're starting to get serious. Let's go back to this letter, Eric, because it's getting serious.
As if it wasn't.
As if it wasn't. But here's where we're starting to tie it all in. Gadjusek, the doctor in question, was identified by David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, as a close associate of Walter Ace Brown, the pimp involved with child trafficking from Detective Rothstein's files and book. Okay, a convicted pimp of young males. Brown, who stated in 1972 to NYPD Detective James Rothstein that people in Yonkers were killing kids and burying them in a park. Brown took Rothstein to a Yonkers park, but he was unable to locate any graves. Rothstein reportedly informed this to a detective, and no report was located to verify his account. Brown has indicated to me, meaning Brown told Kevin Murphy, okay, because Kevin Murphy interviewed Brown, knowledge of the cult in Untermeyer Park, but denies knowing any more. Now, here's the second witness, independent. Okay, so you have David Berkowitz already talking to a confidential informant that Gadjusek was a member of the Yonkers cult and was around for homicides and knew about homicides of children. Okay, here's where it starts to get much more serious than this. Okay, John Lentini, currently in Greenhaven Correctional Facility. Now, we need to back up a second and talk about John Lentini. Who was John Lentini? Let's show him there. Now, in this picture, he goes by a name Daishin John Wolfhawk, okay? That was a name that he made up for himself. This is John Tiny Lentini, okay? And what he was a very, very violent, prolific.
He's dead?
I think he's dead. He was a very violent head of a motorcycle gang called the Rat Pack here in New York City and Westchester. He was also a serious convicted child molester. I mean, I'm not going to get into what this guy did. If you're interested, Mike Codella talks about it in the interview that he gave with me. But it's extremely disturbing, and I don't want to bring it up to this audience here. Okay, so now he's in jail. He wants to get out of jail, right? So he offers up information on stuff that he knows. It just so happens that one of the items that he knows about was the murder of Etan Patz. So we're going to get that in here. John Lentini, Tiny Lentini. So let's go back to page 3 of that letter, please, Eric. Tiny Lentini, currently in Greenhaven Correctional Facility, has identified photographs of Gadjusek and has given a statement that Gadjusek was a member of the Westchester cult and that his motorcycle club, the Rat Pack, dealt with regarding homicides, stolen property, and occult rituals. Please just go to page 4. Lentini states that he did not know the name Daniel Carleton Gajdusek. He knew him as Moloch and as Rado, 2 cult names, and as a principal member of the Westchester adult group. The members of the Rat Pack called him the Professor. Now, I had a question for Mike Codella when I read this originally on our show a couple weeks ago on Subscribestar. I said to him, well, this doesn't sound believable to me, Mike, because why would an esteemed Nobel Prize winning doctor be anywhere near a guy like John Lentini, a Rat Pack, a motorcycle gang member? And Mike Codella essentially said, hey, Schmendrick, if you're a child molester, you go where the children are. You go where the people are who can get you the kids. Right. If you're a drug user, you go to your drug dealer. And they might, so that, like, I was like, yeah, of course that makes sense.
And you combine it and probably get the drugs to control the kids.
Exactly. So the members of the Rat Pack called him the Professor. One such homicide, so the rest is redacted, but one such homicide that Gadjusek was present for was that of a young boy Lentini called Ethan. Now, I want to talk about this for a second, Eric, if I may. Mike Codella, Detective Mike Codella, who took the statement from Tiny Lentini in 1996 in Greenhaven, and who has been on my show several times talking about this interview. You can easily see it on his YouTube channel. He was convinced that Lentini was telling the truth because Lentini screwed up the name. Mike, as a very savvy detective, realized that if Lentini had come to him with a tale so perfect, like, yeah, Etan Patz and this and that, and knew the name perfectly, like it wouldn't have been as believable in a sense as like if he's kind of screwed it up a little bit, right? And Etan is kind of a name that sounds like Ethan, and it would be easy to screw up if you're not familiar with, like, you know, Israeli or Hebrew names. So Codella took that very seriously, and he lended a lot of credibility to Lentini's statement because of that. And so getting back to the letter here, this would be Etan Patz, missing from Lower Manhattan in 1979. Currently, there is no concrete evidence other than the statements of Berkowitz and Lentini to testify to that fact. But if the evidence is correct, this case is involved in the sexual exploitation of minors, pornography, kidnapping, and homicide. I would request that your office consider initiating grand jury proceedings, and I feel that granting immunity. So they basically said grant him immunity. Well, what did Gajdusek do after getting this? Well, he got the hell out of the United States. He moved to Norway, where he lived out the rest of his days unmolested, to use a bad term. He lived,
which tells you something, right? Because where did he win the Nobel Prize? Who gave? Sweden, next door, right?
Right, Norway, right, exactly.
Oh, no, it is not. Wait.
No. He went to Norway. I think Sweden. I don't know who gives the prize exactly. Is it Sweden?
I thought it was Sweden. Anyway, now I'm throwing it off. Now, everybody in the chat make fun of me if I got it wrong, but I thought it was Sweden. But I think it's very, very interesting to go to an area and what do you support that? You know, is this part of that Nordic philosophy that is so progressive? And how progressive is this? This is a little.
Exactly. Well, you saw that BBC interviewer be like, does it bother you that these adult notions of propriety, like this guy was just talking about molesting 300 kids, and the BBC interviewer is harping on.
This is why he was a Swede, and it's out of Oslo, so that does make it even worse. Nobel was from Sweden, and the prize is out of Oslo, Norway, and that's what I was going to say. So they
protected him.
They're okay with their prize going to this monster. I never saw anything about it being rescinded or anything else.
None.
Yet, I don't know for sure, but I wonder if the Nobel Prizes have been rescinded from anybody else who, let's just say, you don't like their politics later or something like that, or whatever committee. It's very, very.
And he was a Nobel Prize winner when this Etan Patz thing happened, because he won the prize in '76. And Etan Patz was 1979. So this is a case. So Codella, Detective Codella, it was told even further by informants that the body of Etan Patz was up in a farm in upstate New York. Detective Codella didn't give me any notion as to where that was. Maybe he's still somewhat closed-mouthed about this, just in case we can still find people involved. But he actually went up there with a partner, and they spoke to the owner of the farm. The owner of the farm was very interested in what they had to say, but absolutely refused to allow them on the property whatsoever to do any sort of ground penetrating radar, anything. And then that was the end of it. It kind of died there. The NYPD shut Codella down, which is very interesting, because that's wisps of what happened in Son of Sam, where the investigation was just shut down completely. And also, very interestingly enough, that's wisps of another investigation, which I'm looking into, called Operation Together, which was a task force in the early 70s about the gay underground and the mafia and the bars and child trafficking and pimping and the nexus between the mafia and the gay bars. There was this whole and all these murders that were happening to prominent gay people. There was it was an investigation called Operation Together, which was shut down unceremoniously by the NYPD once they got to because that involved people from the UN and child homicide.
When was that?
That was the early 70s. So I'm working on.
I was thinking Roy Cohn. Sorry.
Well, Roy Cohn's name is definitely in those Maury Terry files. Well, at least that one
but
file
he was
that
a
I
fixer
have.
And
total fixer.
Had the ability to
blackmail,
influence, and I mean he was hardcore.
Compromise. Yeah, he these people who do this type of stuff, their notion is the rules don't apply to us, and we're out to win. And boy, we could learn something from that on our side, or I should say on my side. I can't presume to speak for you, Eric, but of course we're not into all that other weird stuff. But they play to win. They don't play around. So yeah, Roy Cohn was out there compromising people, blackmailing people. This Operation Together was also blackmailing politicians, filming them having sex with children, and then using it as blackmail. So these basically. Why I find this so fascinating is one, we got the official another case where we have this official story, which makes no sense. There was no body, there was no real investigation. They arrested and put into jail 2 mentally ill schizophrenics, and And then you have this other story where two independent people, Lentini and Berkowitz, don't know each other. They weren't in the same jail. They both told the same exact story. So there's a lot of credibility there. And Detective Codella was convinced that Lentini was telling the truth. And of course, now we have the Yonkers Police Department where they were convinced that these people were telling the truth. And of course, this went absolutely nowhere. And once Gadjusek died, that was it. People still, to the extent that they think about Etan Patz, they think about it as just some poor kid who was abducted and killed by some strange guy on the streets of Manhattan, when the truth might be a lot darker and deeper, that Etan Patz was abducted by an organized pedophile ring consisting of extremely elite people who traded children around amongst themselves, was brought up to a mansion in Westchester, was placed on an altar, and was ritualistically sacrificed, and then his body buried in a farm upstate. All the while, Carleton Gadjusek, the professor, Rado, Moloch, and all his elite wealthy friends are standing around doing God knows what at this ritual, if it happened in the first place, because again, it's all alleged. We have to say all that kind of stuff. But I'm taking the word of the detectives on the case. If Detective Mike Codella says that this was real, because we become good friends and he's a very serious person, I am willing to go out on a limb and say that I believe that this is actually what happened to Etan Patz. And that's pretty much all I have to say, Eric.
Wow. There's that famous mic drop, and I don't have anything to follow up on, because this is obviously slightly outside of my normal fare. I do like to bring different things, different questions, and I encourage everyone, please help get the word out. But again, I hope I warned people enough, because I wasn't kidding. This really does deeply bother me to the core, and I know it bothers most people. And I just I have such mixed feelings about this story. I hate to say, can we get back to more pedestrian serial killing? It's just terrible.
We could talk about Son of Sam all day long. At least it involved adults.
Yeah, it's wow. It just staggering. But seriously, Manny, this has been fantastic. I mean, obviously, you're probably going to come back to do something else, follow up on this or other.
We have a million things to talk about. Since I've last spoken to you, Eric, on the Son of Sam front, we have come into so much information. We have become the clearinghouse in the world for Son of Sam, and it's just unbelievable, the stuff we're uncovering. So I'd love to come back anytime, and we can take it as far as you want.
I want to see where this goes, if there ever is a tie to Epstein and beyond.
We're looking for it,
because of, New York and whatever else. And for everybody else who's watching, please note there's a pinned comment. I have a second channel, America's Untold Stories, and tomorrow at 5:30 we will be doing part 3 of Alec Baldwin, and that story keeps growing, keeps getting crazier, and ultimately will be leading into its own weird stuff. It won't be tomorrow, but tomorrow may have Robert Barnes joining us as well. So I hope everybody considers checking it out, and obviously check out Manny's channel.
Thank you.
And from his channel, that's a good headway into if you want to go to a Subscribe Star and get really deep into it and support him. Because
thank you.
This is how the guy makes a living, folks. So he's got to.
I was fired from all my work. I had to do something, and this became a full-time job. So it's been extremely rewarding.
Well, and thank you and no thank you. It's just mixed emotions.
I get it, Eric. It's tough stuff. That's for sure.